Oh, hi everyone. We're just waiting for Dr. Jacob Glannville to join the live. So, in the meantime, you can think of any questions that you might want to ask to him, and we can ask them at the end of the interview session. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right, doing all right.
So everyone, this is Dr. Jacob Glannville, who is an entrepreneur, innovator, and computational immunoengineer, and the CEO and founder of Distributed Bio. And I'm Christina Kilgore. I've been organizing or interviewing a bunch of researchers or people who are well known in diseases such as COVID-19. And I'm going to be an incoming junior, and I'm the executive director of public relations at United2Care. So for our first question, Dr. Glannville, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. First off, thanks for having me on, and hello everyone. I'm a computational immunoengineer. I know it's kind of a mouthful, but that just means I'm an immunologist that uses math and computers to help engineer new medicines. And the kinds of medicines that I produce are taking advantage of our immune system. So that could be vaccines, and we work on broad spectrum vaccines. There's a Netflix documentary series about work that I've been working on, and one of my lead scientists, Sarah Ives, on a broad spectrum vaccine for influenza. And then we also work on engineering antibodies. So these are the same molecules you elicit from a vaccine, but we can pull those out of an organism and engineer them so you can grow them in big bioreactor vats to make medicines. And a bunch of companies work with my company to make these kinds of medicines. And then this year we used our technologies to make an antibody therapy that would neutralize the coronavirus. And so we're working to make that into a medicine as well. A little bit about where I'm from. So my parents are innkeepers of the Posada de Santiago. It's a little hotel and restaurant in Guatemala. I grew up in Guatemala in Lake Atitlan. That's where the hotel is. And I came back to the States to finish my last year of high school. I did undergraduate at UC Berkeley. I worked at Pfizer, building antibody therapeutics, and did my PhD at Stanford in computational systems immunology. And then I actually launched my company at the same time I started my PhD program. And so now I'm doing the company full time. I'm actually getting ready. We're building a second company now called Synovax. And it's focusing on the therapeutics. And then the other side of the company, it basically offers our technologies to a whole bunch of other, kind of the rest of the pharmaceutical industry, which is great, but I feel like that job is done. So now I'm going to focus on what I think is the cool stuff, which is making these medicines.
That sounds like really interesting. That's a lot of things that you've done so far. Um, so for our questions that are more about the disease, could you just describe what exactly COVID-19 is?
Sure. So yeah, as you all may have noticed, the world sucks a bit right now. So COVID-19 is a coronavirus. There's a whole big family of coronaviruses. Some of them cause a disease that feels like a common cold. Some of them can infect, cats and chickens and all sorts of critters. The coronavirus has also included pretty scary viruses like SARS and MERS that had outbreaks, almost 20 years ago in the case of SARS. And then this year, we had that pretty gnarly outbreak that started off in China and has since become massively pandemic all over the world, so that every nation is affected. And it's the reason we're all stuck at home. It's an RNA virus, so it's similar to flu in that respect, although they're very different viruses. What it has in common with many other viruses, that most viruses are kind of round if you were to zoom in on them with a very powerful microscope. And they tend to have these spikes on the outside of like a round sphere. And the viruses use those spikes to stab into your cells, and then they are able to peel open the membrane and inject their RNA into your cell and infect you. It turned out to be helpful that this virus is a cousin of SARS and MERS, and as I'll tell you later, we use some of that information and some of what was learned over the last 20 years from SARS and MERS to help us build antibody therapies against these viruses. That's also. Can you hear
It's
me?
frozen, but we can still hear you. Yeah. I think the audio just cut out.
Oh, all right, give me a second.
Yeah,
Let
it's
me check
working
to
now.
make sure I'm
Yeah.
on the wireless here real quick.
In the meantime, you guys can ask questions. I think there's a button where you can submit questions that we can read at the end of the live. So in the meantime, while we're getting like the technical difficulties figured out, you can use that feature. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm back. All right, back and better than ever. Yeah, so the virus has these spikes, uses it to invade your cells, and somewhat similar to SARS and MERS, we've used that information to engineer our antibodies. Also, it's part of the reason we're able to make vaccines so quickly. The various groups that are making vaccines is that we kind of already knew a lot about the coronaviruses and the anatomy of those spikes. Uh, the reason we're really interested in those spikes is that if you can block them with antibodies, then the virus is no longer infectious. That's called neutralizing the virus. And that's sort of the objective of vaccine science as well as antibody therapeutic science, is to go block those spikes so that the virus is essentially harmless in the body.
Mm-hmm. How is COVID-19 unique and how is it able to spread so easily?
Yeah, so COVID-19 is compared to Ebola. It occupies this very frustrating middle ground compared to, Ebola, for instance, and MERS and SARS were pretty deadly fast. Now that sounds scary, but that's actually a good thing in terms of a pandemic because you're able to isolate the problem pretty quickly. This virus, 20% of people that get quite sick. In fact, half of the people get who half of the people don't even realize they're sick, and that's a problem because the virus can get in these people and it's sort of like a Trojan horse. They could be infected for weeks and be transmitting the virus and not know it. And that means that it's really hard to lock down through airports, into people's homes. That's made it really difficult to block. This is also a pretty infectious virus. It's not fully airborne, but it's pretty close to it. It definitely gets spread mostly by coughing and sneezing. People have, there's this policy of trying to maintain 6 feet of distance, and that 6 feet of distance, sneezing won't hit you. But that's not really enough to fully stop this virus because
I think
some
the
people are
audio
able
cut
to
out
create like
again.
little droplets throughout a room. This horror story of a singing.
Yeah, I think the audio isn't working. Yeah. Yeah, we can't hear you. Mm-mm.
Oh, I'm back.
Okay, yeah, it's good now.
How much of that did you hear versus how much went radio silent?
I think it was probably the last 15 seconds it cut out completely, but it was a little staticky before, but still understandable.
Tell you what, I will try to give shorter answers. That way we can go back and forth and we'll lose less information in case that happens.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
cool.
For the next question, what are some of the latest updates of COVID-19 research at your lab?
The COVID-19 research from my lab,
Or, yeah.
or in general? Okay, I'll say both in general and then my lab. So, most recent exciting updates in general. In terms of diagnostics, the Abbott and a couple other companies have released these super fast testing kits, and considering getting one from my lab that can run a couple of minutes or 10 minutes, 15, a couple different versions of the kits. That's awesome because that means you could have, results around the vaccines. I think the smart money right now is that we're going to have working vaccines by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And there's progress moving the antibody therapies forward, although not as much attention as I'd like. In terms of our therapy, protects super well. 97% reduction in virus in the lungs if they get our therapy. The lung resolves lung pathology faster. Where right now it would be waiting until the beginning of 2021 before we could even start, and we're trying to see if we can wheel and deal to speed that up a bit.
Mm-hmm. What are some processes that researchers have to undergo when experimenting with COVID-19 in a lab environment and when trying to create a vaccine?
Can you ask the question one more time?
Oh, yeah. What processes do researchers have to undergo when experimenting with COVID-19 in a lab environment and also when trying to create a vaccine for COVID-19?
Yeah, so the coronavirus is a pretty cool example of what you need to do. This is literally a virus that didn't exist until the beginning of the year, and we need to boot up all these technologies and research on it. So one thing you need is you need to be able to grow the virus. So you need to figure out what's the next thing you need is you need to have animals that actually can get infected with the virus so you can go test it out. And that around March, people determined.
I think the audio cut out again. Yeah, I don't think the audio is working. Yeah, I don't think we can hear you. I don't think we can hear you.
All right, back for now. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. I think we kind of lost you towards the beginning of the question, but I can ask the question again if you want, so you can just restart.
I'll say briefly, this is basically you need to grow the cells, grow the virus in cells. You need to have some animals that can get infected by the virus, and you need to have some structural biology information that gives you guidance on how to engineer parts of the proteins from the virus. That was the short version.
Why is it important to find a COVID-19 vaccine, and what types of immediate or long-term effects will it have on society?
I mean, having a vaccine will be good, but it's not actually going to stop the virus. It's not going to stop the crisis. So imagine we have a working vaccine in January 2021. That's awesome, but it's going to take, first off, months if we're lucky, and wait for your vaccine. Not everyone's going to be able to afford it in the world, and that's a problem because if everyone isn't receiving the vaccine, then you herd immunity. You also have, 50% of Americans may not take a vaccine because of vaccine hesitancy. Vaccines don't work on everybody. They don't work that well on the elderly, the immunocompromised, the antibodies. And so you add all that stuff up, and we may not be able to achieve herd immunity. I've also vaccinated everyone who receives them. So even if a vaccine was perfect, which they never are, you're talking about all of 2021 still being in a medical crisis because there's going to be enough people still getting sick and going to the hospital. You also have to consider and vaccines wear off, so it's an uphill battle. That's why I've been focusing on antibody therapies, and other people have also been focusing on diagnostics. And I think if you have a good antibody therapy in the hospitals, that can help get rid of the crisis because it's no longer so scary to get sick. The 80% of people medicine and get better.
Mm-hmm. What is your best estimate on how long we're still gonna how long we're gonna have to wear masks for? Will it be like a while or short term? What's your best estimate
Sorry,
on
can you say that
how
one more time?
long we're gonna have to wear masks for? Oh, can you hear me?
Could you
Oh,
say repeat the question one more?
I don't think we can.
Yeah,
Oh,
I can hear you now.
oh yeah. Okay, what's your best estimate on how long we are gonna have to be wearing masks for?
Yeah. So here's my best estimates. Vaccines are going to work. They're coming out around January, give or take a month or two, and we'll have them out throughout 2021. You should get vaccinated. Unless something very scary happens in the phase 3 right now, you should get vaccinated because the side effect of COVID can be really nasty. It's not worth it. Even young, healthy people, you could get a whole bunch of what kind of long-term recovery lung damage sucks. You want to be able to hike mountains and stuff and not be an invalid in your 20s. And on top of that, though, we have these antibody therapies. And having good antibodies is revolutionary because it no longer is so scary to get sick. Get sick, you get the IV of the antibody, and you get to go home. And that makes this and no longer a medical crisis. It makes it a manageable, widespread disease like, the flu or tuberculosis or HIV. These aren't good, but they're manageable. And so I'm estimating by summer of 2021, the society will largely normal, and it's going to be a consequence of vaccine programs plus good therapies.
Mm-hmm. What are some steps that we can take at home?
When the vaccines take them, most of the people listening right now are in the luxurious category of being very low risk for this virus, but you can really say it's low risk for young people between the ages of like 10 and like 22. Your risks, people could like open colleges, but then put a moat around them or have them on an island so that people in their young 20s or their late teens, where you get vaccinated when the therapy's there, and you
For our last
fine. The whole
question,
risk is they'll bring it back
do you
to
foresee in the future any virus or
grandma.
pandemic
Main
that
objective right
will
now
be
is
able to
don't get your
spread as
grandma
quickly
sick.
as
Oh,
COVID-19, and what can labs do to prevent future outbreaks? Uh,
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about that problem. It's all focused on like what can we do to fix this current problem, but I think we actually should higher. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but we're also in the middle of the golden age of biotechnology, and we have the tools at our disposal to create whole swaths of viruses. Like I'm hoping some of the energy and frustration globally from this pandemic is sources from government agencies to empower us to produce many of the pathogens we've taken live essentially at
So now we're going to move into the second
humanity,
part of the interview, which is the Q&A portion. So I'm just going to read some of the questions that people who have been watching have asked. And the first one, question someone asked is,
and California did a really good job of being very proactive early. On the other hand, you know, we have I think the Bay Area is doing a pretty good job. If you travel around the Bay Area, that's
our next question is it's kind of related to what we already asked, but if a vaccine was found for COVID-19, how
in general,
would
I think
it possibly be implemented?
Doses of vaccines. And I think the smart money as an immunologist is those vaccines are going to distribute them in the United States and throughout the world. The government should subsidize those vaccines. I know there's a vaccine in China that's about $150. I've heard the United States vaccines, some of them might be free. I think government should make them free because the cost economy and the safety of the citizenry is much higher than the cost of like $20 per dose or whatever to get people treated. It's going to take a long time. It's, you know, it's a challenge to, when have we ever manufactured 7 billion doses of medicine, right? So in order to vaccinate the human population, and we have to vaccinate everyone, because if we vaccinate just certain regions, the places that haven't been vaccinated are infecting us again. But it's doable. It'll take time. I think the bigger challenge is going to be communication. You have some people who are worried about taking a rushed vaccine. Some people are, you know, vaccination. Some people who just can't afford it if the medicine's. I have to say, you know what, I don't have. If it costs like what remdesivir costs, and that's something that really politicians need to fix. But collectively, many other people to do the same, because as soon as I know I have good antibodies, I don't have to worry about this
our next question is it bad to go back to school?
Travel to Hawaii, you know, infecting my grandmother anymore, so it's worth it. A loaded question. It depends on how the schools are structured. Again, you are at low risk. If you're in like early 20s, you're not zero, but they're low. The real risk is that you're going to get other people infected. And that could be the teachers, that could be your parents, that could be your grandparents. That's your real risk. And also, the risk isn't zero. So some people in their teens and 20s are going to have lung tissue damage and other issues. Most people are going to be okay. So the danger of going back to school is for sure, even if you're okay, you could get infected and go spread it to other people that you know. And so that's the real risk. Again, if it was a boarding school, if we had to go back to school, it would be a boarding school, still wear masks, because then you
How
would be away from
can
everybody else for a long
we
time and you wouldn't
differentiate the
risk grandma.
flu
I think
from
that's
COVID-19?
a mixing pot of a school could bring the virus back out to the community. So they're totally different viruses. The coronavirus are different from the influenza viruses. You can differentiate them medically. I mean, there's lung pathology, but the big differences are that there's flus. If the flu reaches out to the community, it doesn't spread as efficiently because there's herd immunity. For some people, have across the new version of flu. The other big difference infects a lot more of your tissues than the flu. You feel miserable, but the coronavirus causes like and can cause COVID toes and neurological disorder damage and affect your liver. And so there's a whole bunch of issues where the coronavirus is going through your bloodstream and causing other problems. The coronavirus is much deadlier than the flu. It's much more
what
dangerous.
are the steps
Like, the
to
flu's
get
not
a
good,
COVID-19
but we do
vaccine
because it's not that dangerous compared to about 10 to 20 times more dangerous. Those are the major differences. Well, we're near the end of it. You basically run these phase trials. In the third phase, they give the vaccine to a lot of people, like 30,000 people. And then they watch that group of people compared to their group of 30,000 people who hadn't received the vaccine. And as long as they see that those people didn't get sickened from the vaccine, it doesn't have horrible side effects. And second, that group of people was protected from becoming infected, then at that point, the FDA will evaluate the
this
data
question's kind of
and
related
potentially
to the one
approve
you
the
just
medicine.
answered, but
Realistically,
how is
we're
the
going to see that
development of
happen
your
over the next
vaccine
few
going
months.
so
I
far?
estimate around the end of the year, we're going to get 1 and potentially 3 different vaccines approved. So, yeah, so we're doing 2 things, right? We have a vaccine for flu, and separately, we have an antibody therapy for COVID-19. The flu program right now is supported by the Gates Foundation, and we're doing, and that's where you give the vaccine to ferrets and pigs, and then afterwards you spritz them in the face with some flu and you see if they get sick or not. That's sort of your best test. For pigs, that really says, is this a vaccine that we could go release in the animal pigs? So not only is it a good study for human flu, but we can actually make money in that market and make it something useful to protect pigs. Chief science officers here to where a company called Milsing a bunch of doses of our drug so we can run clinical trials. And then the clinical
the next
trials
question
aren't going to
is,
start
what
early
is the
next
best
year
way to protect ourselves
unless
from
we can
COVID-19?
do some wheeling with some other nations or with the FDA to process. So best things to do are wash your hands, wear a mask, avoid networking with people you don't know, avoid hanging out with many other people. It is much safer. If you can, try to exercise. So jogging or something, cardio exercise that causes you to breathe a lot will help you build up a reserve. So athletes tend to get less sick, and that's because their lungs are sort of worked out. They've got good things. These are hypotheses, but it just seems like they have a better reserve, so they sick, they can put up with having less.
I think
so
the next few questions we've already gone over them, but I could just read them just to make sure everyone knows in case they weren't watching at first. So the next question is, has your coronavirus research been successful so far?
Super successful so far. So our antibodies, I'm so proud of my team. Our antibodies and neutralizes the virus so it can't infect human cells anymore. And then two laboratories had the super high biosafety facilities where the scientists have to go in spacesuits because they have the real virus in there. So hamsters that protected from the virus. So they didn't get COVID-19. They had resolution of lung tissue pathology, 97% reduction of virus in the lungs. And the ones who got sick, they were losing weight and feeling sick and had lung tissue problems. So as long as people act like hamsters, we're in really good shape. So our medicine right now is in manufacturing. It looks really clean in safety and tox. We have chunky little hyperstoke. Like if you're a hamster, you're good. You're chilling. Basically now we're on to people right now. Stations with the FDA. Stay tuned for our publications. We're putting it up in bio. In fact, I'm giving a big talk about our program next week on Tuesday.
How soon will the American population get vaccinated?
Biologic Therapeutics Development Congress. And yeah, stay tuned. We're going to be going into humans in a few months. Well, that depends on the Americans. The vaccine should be ready around the end of the year, and I think you'll have access. Most Americans will have access pretty quickly, provided it's free or close to free. And then at that point, the challenge is who will get vaccinated. 20% of Americans will say there's no way they'll get vaccinated. 30% of people are like vaccine. I suspect there's a lot of people who initially are going to be like, I don't want to be the one to take a rush vaccine, and then they're going to sit around and they're going to have some FOMO because the people who get vaccinated, they'll be like, wee, I'm free, I can go back and party and stuff. And the truth is, don't do that. Wait 2 months. A vaccine takes 2 months to kick in, so you need to take the vaccine and like don't pop the champagne yet. Chill for 2 months. Really, there's going to be some tests out there to show that you have good antibodies. Then you can go back to society. You're probably like, I think so low at that point. I think you worry so much, and I think that's going to let vaccine hesitant. They're going to get frustrated of wearing masks, and they're going to go get vaccinated as well. But realistically, this is going to be a lot of time getting enough people vaccinated.
I think this is our last question. It asks, how would you encourage high schoolers to look for lab opportunities? And at your own lab, do you have any open position for high schoolers or people who are interested?
Sure. So I would say the first thing to do is figure out what you love. If you're doing what you love, you won't even notice getting past everyone else because you're having so much fun. And if you're not doing what you love, you're never really going to feel like the people who love it are ahead of you. And so find that thing that just excites you and you're like, oh my God, this is so awesome. It doesn't feel like work. And that's what I love what I do because I feel like I'm solving puzzles all day and I'm pry into the secrets, the mysteries of the universe. Fascinating to me because we're like learning the rules of how life works. And the rules kind of make sense. They're like how Legos work. It feels a little bit like a sci-fi movie where the astronauts like climb into an alien spacecraft and it's sort of been floating through the solar system, abandoned, but you slowly like learn how all the gizmos work and you start being able to operate it. That's what engineering life feels like. You kind of piece, you start realizing, oh, this is what this protein does. Oh, we can actually stick these two together and create something new. And we're kind of emerging in this golden age, this like almost, you know, on one hand, very primitive because there's so much we don't know. But on the other hand, there's almost this like godlike thrill of being able to engineer a molecule to affect cell, affect a life form, and be able to use the language of treat biology. So get stoked. And then in terms of the area I have noticed is that I have had a couple high school interns who've worked with us. So Aishani Atra, them, Sartaj, Rajpal. What they both had in common is they were doing comp biology. That was something where it's still a relatively rare skill set to be able to do computer programming and have some knowledge in RNA and proteins and sequence and stuff. And it's something where you can come that's valuable right away. And that just is an entryway that makes you valuable, which is always a great way to work with people. That's a little than coming in. It's just difficult to imagine coming in with a lot of background from high school. And whereas computation, you could just roll in and be like, yeah, I know how to program or in Python. And then you're suddenly of value to the laboratory because that's a skill set not many other people have. And people are willing to then teach you what they know in exchange for you performing computation for them.
I think we have one last question. I think we've already talked about it, but just to make sure everyone's questions answered. The question is in the comments, and the person's wondering is, when will there be a cure for COVID-19?
Yeah, so I mean, we're working on it. So we have the vaccines; those are preventative, and then you have the therapies, which are the cures. There's going to be a couple waves. There's a couple companies that are going to produce medicines a little faster than mine. The company called Regeneron, a company called Lilly, and that's good. We want these medicines out as soon as possible. I think theirs are going to come out probably by the year. I didn't have access to the level of funding that they did. So it's going to take me a little longer. I think ours is big in kind of Q2 of next year. We're trying to find ways to speed that up. Our value proposition is we're going to charge way less. So I think ultimately, if I manage to do what I'm trying to do, I think I could have a bigger impact on the world because I'm not going to try to charge $5,000 a dose. So I'm going to try to charge like $300 a dose, $400 a dose. And that makes a difference between, first off, the whole world being able to afford it. And second, I want to be in a position where you're trying a cure, right? I don't want, the current position would be people get sick and they get very sick enough that the doctors at a hospital decide, okay, let's try to give them the IV of the antibody. And do they have the insurance to cover it? Blah, 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 right? That is good, but that's not really where I want us to be. I want it to be cheaper than an iPhone to have a life-saving therapy so that not only hospital covered, but people choose to take the medicine earlier. So more effective the earlier you take them. The ideal arrangement is that we take advantage of these cheap tests. So you get you may not even feel sick. You just get your COVID test you do once or whatever because it costs $5 now, and you find out you're COVID positive, and without screwing around and waiting to see if you get sick, you just go get a subcutaneous injection, a little shot of the antibody that goes in your lungs, neutralizes the virus, and you never feel sick in the first place. And that's really where I want us to be in society, so that people aren't going to the hospital, they're not clogging use, they're not risking the long haul or slow recovery. The way that makes sense is if you have a whole bunch of medicine and you sell it for cheap dollars, I'm not going to go take it.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for being able to come on this live and explain more about COVID-19 and the research that you and your team have been doing. I think it's a really great opportunity and extremely impactful how not only you're trying as best as you can to create a vaccine, but also make sure it's available for everyone, no matter where they economically stand. So I just want to say thank you so much. And before we end the live, if there's any last words or anything else you want to say.
I just want to first off thank my team. So this is a team effort, and I'm just very fortunate to have remarkable people that I've worked with who've been willing to work on this day and night and push it forward. And we're not taking taking the easy route, they're cashed out differently. It's challenging, and we're not there yet. But we have the medicines because people are willing to go work hard to get there. I think we're gonna make we do it right. We're gonna make a big difference, and it's the consequence of this. Christina, Devin, Cindy, the whole JP, Aishani, the list of remarkable people that made this possible. So them. The last thing you, I really like the question about how to get involved, and I would just encourage, like, this is going to be a year where you need to find ways to be interested, otherwise you're going to be bored. That felt isolated and bored, but instead I used that time to like read a bunch of books and principles. So it was during a civil war, so I didn't have access to a lot of books, so I would try to find the ones that would let me think about a lot of the work. Writing.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say thank you again for so much for coming on the live, and I hope everybody got their questions answered and also being all these interviews. So thank you again, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and that the research still goes well, and that everything will hopefully get figured out soon. Thank you. Bye. Okay, thank you everyone for watching the live, and we're going to arrange to have another one like this soon, so stay tuned for that. But I just want to thank you all for watching, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye.